going to show you guys how to make a cage cuff using a pop tube, or sometimes known as a fidget tube. Let's get started. Alright, you're going to need string and scissors, 2 different colors of beads, one of these or something similar. I call it a pop tube. I know a lot of people call these fidget tubes. I don't know what they're actually called, but this is what's going to go inside of the cuff. Alright, so you're going to start by adding 2 filler beads and a connector bead. 2 filler beads and a connector bead. These pink ones are called connector beads because as I continue to build the cuff, I will thread through these again, connecting new sections of the cuff. These blue ones are called filler beads because they fill the gap between the connectors. Now you just keep doing this pattern, 2 fillers and a connector, 2 fillers and a connector until you get to the length that you need. I'm making mine 45 beads around. That's a pretty standard size for me. I am a bigger guy, so if you're a smaller person, something like 42 or 39 might be better for you. Keep in mind though, since it's a cuff, it has to fit over your fist, not just your wrist. Once you get it to the size you need, pull it tight and tie a knot, and I'll show you the next step. Alright, this little tether here is where I tied the knot. I came through this pink connector bead, and then I added on a filler bead, a connector bead, and a filler bead. And then I threaded into the next connector bead down from where I started, which is here, thread into the next one. As you come out, add on a filler bead, a connector bead, and a filler bead. Thread into the next connector bead down. And just keep following that pattern all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. Remember, this string is where I had started. I've come all the way around. I did a filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Then I threaded through that first connector bead. These triangles I've been making, I went up through the filler bead and the connector bead at the tip of the first triangle. As I came out, I did a filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Then thread through the connector bead at the tip of the next triangle. And it's just the same thing over again. Filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Thread through the connector bead at the tip of the next triangle, and just keep doing this all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. Alright, remember, the string is where everything started. I've come all the way around, did a filler bead, connector bead, filler bead, thread into that last remaining connector bead gap. Then this row that you've been forming, you go through the filler bead and out the connector bead up on top. Now it's just 2 filler beads, thread into the next connector bead, 2 filler beads, thread into the next connector bead. Do this all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. Alright, I have made my way around. I did the 2 filler beads, threaded into the connector bead. I've come full circle on that step. Now it's 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Then thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. Then repeat that step. 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. Do that all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. Alright, once you've come all the way around, you're going to thread into that connector bead. That's at the base of the next set of triangles you've been making. Go through the 2 filler beads, out the connector bead up top. And then it's just the same thing again. 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Thread through connector bead at the tip of the next triangle. 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Thread through the connector bead at the tip of the next triangle. Do this all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. And once you've come all the way around, you're going to come back into the base of the step that you just started. Go ahead and pull this tight, so it looks like that. Tie a couple of knots and cut the string, because now we're going to start on the other side. Alright, hopefully this is easy to follow. Here's my tether from where I started. I tied a knot here, came out through the connector bead, and then it's just the same as before. 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads, thread through the next connector bead that's on the cuff. And then just the same process. 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Thread back into the connector bead on the cuff. Do this all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. Alright, once you've come around, it's the 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads. Thread into the connector bead. Come up through these 2 filler beads, and out the connector bead at the tip of the triangle. Now is when you're ready to put on the pop tube or whatever it is that you're going to be putting inside the cage cuff. Alright, once you have your pop tube or whatever it is that you're using seated between the 2 sides, you're going to thread through the connector bead, do 2 filler beads, and then thread into the connector bead from the other side. And then just keep going back and forth like that. 2 filler beads, thread into the connector bead on the other side. 2 filler beads, thread through the connector bead on the other side. Do this all the way around. Then as you've gotten towards the end like this, just pull all of this tight, tie a knot. When you're all done, it should look something like this. I really like making these cuffs a lot. They're pretty lightweight, easy to make, and they hold their shape very well.